Muslim believers and apologists claim every day that the Quran is the word of God, revealed by God to the Prophet Muhammad without a single human error. They also claim that the Quran is full of scientific miracles that prove its divine origin. But is that really true? I will keep the so-called scientific miracles for another video. But in this one, I want to show you 5 clear human touches in the Quran. 5 human errors and personal touches that can only mean one thing: that the Quran was written by a human being. Number 1. Insulting others and using swear words is one of the most interesting psychological phenomena studied in human beings. It is a great coping mechanism and a natural relief in moments of intense emotional overwhelm, like anger or frustration. Swearing is, simply put, a human need. Yet we find in the Quran that God swears and attempts to insult others. In fact, there is a whole chapter in the Quran, Surah Al-Masad, consists only of 5 verses that is purely and plainly swearing at a guy called Abi Lahab. God was so angry that he started cursing him and even calling his wife names, exactly like teenagers calling each other names. God calls Abi Lahab's wife Hammalat Hatab. God is so angry and emotional that you can see it clearly in his words as he starts saying, "May the hands of Abi Lahab perish, and he himself perish. He will burn in a flaming fire." And even his wife, the firewood carrier, Hammalat al-Hatab. Even though she was from the elite society, by the way, God calls her Hammalat Hatab. God, in his anger, wanted to lower her class with untrue status. Typical swearing in a state of anger. Are these words from God or a deeper human psychological need to insult another? Number 2. The Quran constantly uses the word Injil and contributes it to Jesus. Injil is the Arabic word for gospel. Gospel, the English word, comes from the Latin Gospel, meaning good news. Injil in Arabic also comes from the Greek word evangelion. Ev means good and angelion means news. The good news, which goes into Arabic as Injil or Ingil. But what are those good news? The interesting fact that the good news of Jesus' death on the cross and bringing salvation to the world is exactly the doctrine that the Quran rejects. The word Injil or Evangelion has always meant good news of salvation. Even before Jesus' time, Alexander the Great used the term Evangelion, claiming that he brought salvation to the world. So when the Quran contributes the Injil to Jesus Christ, yet rejects his death and salvation, it is a state of cognitive dissonance. It is like saying cigarettes are good for you, but at the same time, they also cause cancer. So Jesus brought good news of salvation, but he didn't die to save nobody. And that is Quran's logic. Number 3. The Quran constantly tells us that the Bible, that is the Torah and the Gospel, were corrupted and the truth was manipulated. This is why God decides to send the Quran through his prophet Muhammad. But amazingly, the Quran also tells us that even the Prophet Muhammad himself seemed to have doubted that the Quran may be from God. Weird, right? Wait. It gets more interesting. Surah Yunus, verse 94. إن كنت في شك مما أنزلنا إليك فاسأل الذين يقرؤون الكتاب من قبلك. If you, O Prophet, are in doubt about these stories that we have revealed to you, then ask those who read the scriptures before you. Hang on a second. God is telling the Prophet that if you are in doubt, which is already weird as it is, but even weirder, that God says to him that the way to verify the truth is to go to those who have corrupted their books and manipulated the truth before. Those will verify the truth, so you have no doubt. I'm sorry, what? Number 4. Another very interesting story is that moment when Prophet Muhammad went to his adopted son, Zayd, but Zayd wasn't home. Accidentally, the Prophet saw Zayd's wife, his daughter-in-law, barely wearing anything. The Prophet instantly felt sexual attraction towards her and desired her. That is not the interesting part. We are all human after all, including the Prophet. But the interesting part is what happened next. God decided to intervene and sends down 2 verses in the Quran. And even though the Quran is supposed to be God's ultimate message to humanity at large, these 2 verses have no benefit whatsoever to humanity at all. Surah Al-Ahzab verse 37 and 38 are just addressing the Prophet's sexual urges according to Islamic tradition. Not my words and not my opinion. Islamic tradition says that at the moment God sent down verses 37 and 38 was to address that issue of desire. And God said, فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٍ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا, when Zayd totally lost interest in keeping his wife, we gave her to you in marriage. There is no blame on the Prophet for doing what Allah has ordained for him. God's ultimate message to humanity here is saying, 1. Women are merely objects. When Zayd is done with her, you, Muhammad, can take over. And 2, O you people, the Prophet is not to be blamed for his desire here, for God has intervened and ordained for him what he sexually desired. What a godly message. Number 5. One of the most controversial verses of the Quran, even among Muslims themselves, is verse number 3 in Surah An-Nisa. فَانْكَحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاث وَرُبَاعَ فَإِنْ خُفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4. But if you are afraid you will fail to maintain justice among them, then content yourselves with 1, or those bond women in your possession. The problem here is not about monogamy or polygamy. It is far beyond that. In this verse, God is legalizing sexual affairs for men. He commands that a man can marry 2 or 3 or 4 women as long as he can maintain justice among all of them. Otherwise, if a man cannot justify multiple wives, then he has 2 options. He either marries only 1 woman or sleep with slaves in his possession. The Arabic term malakat aymanukum literally means those women you owned with your mighty hands. Women captured in wars or brought by money in slave markets. If you cannot justify polygamy, treating all your wives equally, then marry only 1, or otherwise don't marry at all. Just please yourself with 6 slaves you own. To be honest, I'd rather take this as a human law than a word of God. It is much more problematic, to be honest, if you think that these words are God's law. And finally, if you like this video and you'd like to see more like it, please like, subscribe, comment and share. And please support my work on Patreon if you want more content to raise awareness.